Pharaonic how do you pronounce that? Whatever. It's an action RPG set in ancient Egypt. Your avatar wakes up in a prison and is set free by one of the daughters of Ishtar, who is opposing the rule of the Red Pharaoh, who is sacrificing people to extend his life. Using the impending invasion from the north as cover, your avatar is tasked with finding the 4 keys necessary to open the gates of the city of Thebes by finding the bosses holding them and killing them. Like a lot of other games lately, Pharaonic borrows a lot of ideas from the Souls series. You fight using light attacks, strong attacks, dodges, and parries. You have a healing item that gets refilled at every checkpoint, and when you die, you lose a portion of your experience unless you return to the location of your death and reclaim it. Pharaonic puts these familiar mechanics to its own unique presentation, however, so it doesn't feel much like Souls-like. And I think that's a good thing, because what it ends up as is pretty solid. Exploring the environments takes place on a series of 2D planes, so you're only moving left and right. There are various traps, NPCs to talk to, patrolling enemies, and also larger encounters that will lock you in a small area until you can defeat all the enemies that spawn. This side-scrolling perspective does a lot to simplify the gameplay and exploration, but as many of the paths in any given area can look pretty similar, it can be easy to get lost. This isn't helped by the fact that the maps don't display your location and aren't always drawn in a very helpful way. What am I even looking at? The combat is surprisingly solid. It has a nice slow pace, so it makes each action feel more deliberate. You need to avoid or block enemy attacks and find openings to get your own hits in, or, if you can get the timing right, parry an enemy's attack to create an opening. Patience, smart management of your stamina, and not rolling around like a panicky idiot all the time are the key to being successful in combat. So naturally, I suck at it. It doesn't really offer anything new or interesting to the action RPG genre, but it does a very good job of getting the basics down. A little variation is thrown in with special enemy attacks that can't be blocked or dodged. These are signified with red and blue flashes respectively. The side-scrolling perspective makes managing groups a matter of trying to keep all your enemies on one side of you. It feels a lot more manageable than in a 3D environment, but it's still tricky as enemies will jostle for position or lunge at you from the back of the line, and there's not much you can do to close distance the way many of the enemies can. In combat, your movement is very slow, and rolling doesn't speed you up much and wastes precious stamina. So, being able to effectively hold your ground is emphasized, as frequently rolling through groups to get to the other side will burn health and stamina needlessly. While the majority of enemies are just people with slightly different armor, each new area's enemies have their own unique attack animations that you need to get used to. The strategy for approaching them doesn't change much, but it's nice that work was put in to make each variety of soldier feel different. And overall, the combat doesn't escalate very much, even in the bosses. It is good combat, but within the first half hour, you've pretty much seen everything you're going to. Defeating enemies will earn you experience, but this just increases your maximum health, stamina, and mana. Your attack and defense are solely dependent on your equipment. Enemies will occasionally drop pieces of their gear, and there are merchants, but they rarely sell anything better or even as good as the things a location's enemies will be dropping. Armor and weapons are divided into light and heavy varieties. Heavy armor provides stronger defense, but impacts your stamina much more than light armor. Rather than some needlessly vague equipment load stat determining the effects of your armor's weight, in Pharaonic, your maximum stamina is simply reduced by the total weight of your armor. So light armor gives you the offensive advantage of having extra stamina, whereas heavy armor lets you take more hits without dying. I started out with light armor, but switched to heavy when it became apparent that I suck. While light and heavy armor each had their good points, heavy weapons seemed kind of useless compared to light weapons. Heavy weapons are slower and consume more stamina to swing, but deal more damage than light weapons. But it's really not very much more damage. Even with the improved reach, they never really felt like viable choices when compared to the much easier to use light weapons. Equipping weapons and armor requires your avatar to have the proper skill to use them. Otherwise, its stamina drain will increase. You gain these skills by finding shop tea gems in the environment or by completing side quests and bringing them to a trainer who will improve one of the skill categories in exchange for each gem. I don't really like this, as between the number of gems in the game being finite, and the fact that each skill needs to be built up from nothing means that you kind of need to decide what you're going to be using for the rest of the game at the beginning of the game. The gems do make for good rewards for explorations and side quests, but the skill system does more to restrict experimentation than it does to make you feel like you're making a build. In addition to weapons, armor, and shields, you can find special backpacks that allow your avatar to cast magic spells. Unlike with other equipment, not having the proper skill will cause a spell to cost more mana than usual, rather than affect your stamina. These backpacks are separated into support and offensive varieties. Support backpacks will activate temporary buffs, while offensive backpacks will dispense different types of projectiles. They're useful, sure, but they're not exactly exciting. Progression through Pharaonic is a largely linear jaunt through several distinct areas, fighting 4 major bosses for their keys alongside plenty of mini-bosses, then returning to Thebes to finally confront the Red Pharaoh. Each of these areas is very pretty and well designed. Overall, Pharaonic really nails how to make a low polygon art style feel aesthetically complete, and the character designs have that good balance of having somewhat cartoonish proportions, but still being close enough to reality that it doesn't stop you from taking them seriously. Overall, I think Pharaonic is pretty good, just not great. Much like Ziggurat, the only other game from this developer, Milkstone Studios, that I've played, Pharaonic is mechanically and aesthetically a very solidly put together experience. But it doesn't have really even a trace of that oomph that makes it really stand out. That's not terrible, of course. I'll take an unassuming competent game over a loudly bad game, which seems to be more of the norm any day. I get the sense that Milkstone knows what they're doing, and I'd like to see them be able to put that skill into making something stellar, which I believe they're capable of. I give Pharaonic a 3 out of 4. It's solid as heck overall and has a good art style, but I don't like the upgrade system, and as it iterates on its admittedly good formula, it doesn't really add anything interesting to it. Give it a shot, it's pretty good. Hey, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you maybe want to check out some more of my crappy reviews.